I grew up in South San Francisco, and as part of growing up, my brother and sister, who were quite a bit older than me, had cameras, and so I used their cameras from time to time. And I can remember going down to the airport when the San Francisco airport was a really small affair, and taking some pictures there and taking pictures of the industrial atmosphere around the airport, which is interestingly a lot of what I shoot now. I shoot mainly urban and neighborhood shots that don't involve a lot of people in the frame. And I'm trying to break out of that a little bit and include people and take more portraits, which is hard for me. So it's a challenge to take portraits. So my background has been in art because I went to art school. I took art classes in high school, which is a rarity. And then I went to College of San Mateo and majored in art and got an AA degree in art at College of San Mateo, from which I was lucky enough to be sponsored by my dad and go to an art school in Los Angeles called Chouinard. And that's where everything changed for me. Everything shifted. And I became interested in drawing and painting with very little bit of photography thrown in as part of the curriculum. It was a formative period, and I'm still trying to go back to my roots in drawing from time to time, I feel. Because after that, I was in the Peace Corps, and as part of my Peace Corps and leaving the Peace Corps, I was in Malaysia, and I had a job in Thailand, working for the Bangkok World newspaper, which no longer exists, but it was a terrific, terrific experience. I got to do things that I would not ever be able to do in the States. I helped design the magazine. I was the only designer for the magazine, their Sunday magazine for the newspaper. And that was so much fun working with the Thai people. The people who were hard to work with were the expats, some of whom respected the Thai culture and some of whom didn't. And that was also a very formative period. I treasure those moments looking back on them because they laid the foundation for what I'm doing right now, which is in a way more personal and more focused than it was then. Although when I look at my so-called body of work, there's almost too many things in it. And I'd like to have discrete components of my body of work, which I think I'm working towards now. My background was that I had traveled a lot. When I met my wife, Jennifer, we traveled a lot, and I discovered my Italian roots and spent years going back and forth between here and Italy, making stronger connections with my cousins. While I was overseas, I'd say, well, I'd want to take these pictures and I want to come back with this collection of photographs of fresco cycles or of pavements, which I was involved with and appreciating. But then I had so much time, bulk of my time is spent here in the city. And I said, well, I have to find what motivated me overseas here in the city. And I said, but I live in this neighborhood that it's boring. Well, I lived in the Mission, and the Mission isn't really boring. The Mission's actually pretty vibrant. And then I thought downtown was kind of boring, and then I discovered that downtown is pretty vibrant, and I'm kind of, I love construction projects and workers working on a building and watching buildings go up. And so I became interested in doing a series on cranes, building cranes, and a series on pouring cement, things like that, where I captured the spirit, or parts of the spirit of development in the city, which has different sides to it, of course. But I love being in San Francisco because things are constantly moving. I love the city. I have always been attached to urban environments. Well, I like the construction aspect and watching things being built and going up. I also like finding crazy juxtapositions, things that don't belong together in one aspect and one métier, and you see them together and you say, what is this? And then the unexpected always happens, because things are always moving, and there's so many diverse reasons for things happening that it's just tremendously exciting. So I'd like to capture some of that excitement if I can. Sometimes I feel that the artistic process is different than what I'm doing, because what I'm doing is sort of like an activity. It's an activity that I'm doing. But the artistic aspect of it is how you're doing it and how you put together and how you present what you're doing. The present show I'm having at Think Round Gallery is indicative to me, and it brings to the surface elements of composition and form, line, color that I don't think about when I take the picture. And my guess, my feeling is that happens naturally because of my background, because I was immersed in art education for 6 straight years, then I had maybe 10 straight years of working in art-centered jobs. Draftsman for an architectural company, a supervisor for engineering companies in the graphics department. So that was all sort of additive to my education, my formal education. So my informal education supported what my formal education was. So I've been lucky that way, because I've been able to lead a life that was always close to art somehow. And so I'd get this input. And then marrying an artist, there's a whole other aspect. I never thought I'd be a painter, but I had to become a painter in order to help with the jobs we got as muralists. And that was amazing. When I was working in Bangkok, I discovered, because while I was in the Peace Corps, I became the group photographer. I was in group 11 in Malaysia. And I was the group photographer because I had a couple of cameras. Then when I was working for the Bangkok World newspaper, I used my photographic and artistic composition to compose the dummy for the Sunday magazine. And it was a real transition from graphics to photography to graphics. And I think I've always kept the ligature between those, what do you call it? It's between those aspects of how you do things and get things done. And I've been dealing with those ever since. Inspiration is a process that I'm real interested in, because I find myself, when I'm just taking photographs by myself and showing friends and not dealing in a larger audience or being associated with a larger audience, it's not the same thing. It's not as satisfying as being inspired. For me, the highest praise for someone looking at my work and telling me, oh, you inspire me, that's great. That's the best. I recently saw a show at a gallery on Minnesota Street, galleries, that I was inspired because I saw Daoud Bey was the photographer, and he had a series on the Underground Railway during around the time of the Civil War, and he followed this pattern. He was from Ohio, I think, and so he followed some of these paths that the slaves would follow on their way to Canada to freedom. And his photographs are very dark, and I didn't quite relate to them until I saw the show at the gallery. Then it was inspiring because they were very dark, and so you had to get close to these photos to see what was going on, and mostly it was landscape and ground and houses in the background, which was the experience of these people who were terrified and running from a terrible existence to an imagined better existence. And I found a lot in that, because I thought, gee, that's not something that I'd shoot that way, but it was profoundly inspirational for me to see that. So that's the value of getting out and seeing other work that you might not necessarily appreciate and let it happen to you to see when you see what gives there. So I found that very inspiring, and I'm looking for more inspiration like that.